chair of the Capital Area Architectural and Planning Board, or the CAP Board for short, I determined that an in-person meeting was not practical because of the current health pandemic and ongoing peacetime emergency declared under Chapter 12 of Minnesota statute. As is permitted under the open meeting law in these conditions, the meeting of the Capital Area Architectural and Planning Board is being conducted over a virtual call, and all votes will be counted by a roll call. We'll start with determining if a quorum is present by conducting a roll call, which will also give us the opportunity to practice our roll call for future votes. Board members, after I say your name, please unmute your microphone, indicate that you are present, and then mute your microphone again. We will move through alphabetically, beginning with our newest board member, who we will introduce in just a few minutes. So with that, we will begin the roll call. Dr. Kate Bean. Present. Alicia Belton.
Present.
Representative Dean.
Present.
Elaine Fink.
Present.
Don Grundhauser.
Present.
Representative Hertas.
Representative Jerry Hertas, present.
David Landegren.
Present.
Ted Lentz.
Present.
James McLean.
Present.
Senator Nelson.
Senator Carla Nelson here.
Senator Pappas.
Present.
Thank you. A quorum is present. I'd also like to have the architectural advisors and the CAP board staff introduce themselves so that Dr. Bean, our new board member, and Tony Chevalier, our new architectural advisor, can also get to know folks on the board. So architectural advisors, please feel free to unmute your mic, introduce yourself to the board, and then mute your mic again.
Hello, I'm Tony Chevalier. I'm an architectural advisor concerned mostly with landscape architecture. Previously have worked at the University of Minnesota as a campus landscape architect. I'm an adjunct professor there, continue to be, and presently I work in the rest area program at MnDOT.
Thank you. Michael.
Advisor Michael Bjornberg, an architect. Had worked on the Capitol restoration, I guess. You know, so yeah, I've been on the board now. I think this is my third year.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Danita Lemon, architectural advisor, principal with Miller Dougherty Architects.
Thank you, Danita.
That's it for the advisors.
Yep.
Paul Mandel. I'm the executive secretary for the CAP board. I have been in the office since 1987.
This is Peter Musty. I'm principal planner at the CAP board. I've been here for 4 years this month.
And I am Linda Spohr. I'm a planner with the CAP board and have been here about 3 years.
And Madam Chair, just for the public's information, Tony is an appointee of the State Arts Board. Michael Bjornberg is an appointee by the Minnesota AIA, and Danita Lemon is a CAP board appointee.
Thank you so much, Paul, for that additional information, and I'm really grateful to have everyone on this call and in service of the Capitol and surrounding area. It's good to see your faces again, just virtually. I'm sorry we can't be together in person, but I am excited that folks did the test run of Microsoft Teams and think that this will also, for future meetings and engagements, just be another way that we can connect with folks across the state. So I wanted to just talk a little bit about where we're at, and then we can dive in just a little bit more. But since we last met on March 10th, the world has changed, and so much has changed. We've been dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic, which has taken a toll on all of us. Some of us very personally. I lost my brother to COVID at the end of March, and I know that so many other families have experienced that loss across the state, but also across the country. And George Floyd's murder has sparked the movement to address and eliminate systemic racism in our state. And although these conversations about change have been happening in communities for a long time, there is an urgency and a unity to this movement that feels different. And statues and monuments commemorating part of our shared history that don't reflect the best of us have come down around the country, including right here in moment in the state of change. And through our work on the board, I think that we can be a really important part of that change. And it's our job to work through it and to truly be a part of it. 3 months ago, we had planned to discuss the Sears site at the next meeting of the CAP board. That conversation will absolutely still happen, and it is a really critical conversation. In fact, I think it's more important now than ever before. But in light of the demonstrations over the past weeks and the removal of the Columbus statue, we decided to focus today's agenda on addressing how this board can engage in the conversation that our state is having about representation, about community, and about a shared vision of our future together. As many of you have likely seen in the days since the Columbus statue came down, folks have been wondering why no one followed a process. And the honest answer is there is no CAP board policy and process in place to address if and how commemorative works on the Capitol grounds can be removed. We have a lot of processes and policies for other things, but there isn't a clear answer here. CAP board policies do exist for works within the building, and we'll review those today. But we've got a gap when it comes to the Capitol grounds, which is why we'll be hearing more from Paul Mandel, our executive secretary, and David Kelleher from the Minnesota Historical Society today. They will help us better understand what those gaps in policy and in process are, and it will be helpful for us to figure out then how to address them. We need to build a robust, transparent, and accessible public process for this board to use as we consider and reconsider our choices about how the Capitol and surroundings are meant to be. Folks need to feel listened to, and we need to create a way for them to be heard because this is their house. It may seem like a tall order to build this sort of robust public process, and in many ways it is. Consensus-based engagement and decisions are difficult, but they are the work. And the encouraging thing is that we have so many examples of what success can look like and what it means when we get it right. Examples of how public processes about representation have turned into lasting monuments and memorials that our whole community, our whole state can be proud of. A great example is in Bemidji. In Bemidji, a caricature-like statue of Shana Wishkung, commonly known as Chief Bemidji, had been set up in the town since 1952, and an earlier version dated from 1898. Both Native and non-Native members of the community came together about 10 years ago and started a conversation about why that statue was harmful and a harmful representation of Shana Wishkun. For years, a committee composed of both Native and non-Native members met and held town halls to have very difficult yet necessary conversations. It was a time of listening and learning. The idea was to bridge gaps between the communities and areas and to have a positive representation of Native people that honors the Native history in the region and brings honor to the city of Bemidji and all who live there. After these discussions, the committee recommended that the new statue of Shana Wishkung, or Chief Bemidji, be commissioned and that the old statue be placed in a local historical society. Today, and for those of you who have ventured up to Bemidji, may have had an opportunity to see this beautiful bronze statue of Shana Wishkung, and it stands proudly on the shore of Lake Bemidji, right next to a playground that my daughter loves, and the community is proud of the work that they did together. This story and others like it in Minnesota, like Reconciliation Park in Mankato, or the Clayton Jackson McGee Memorial in Duluth, are examples of what is possible when Minnesotans can come together, be heard, and to be reflected in really the fabric and representation of our state. Our own conversations and actions on this board to honor Nellie Stone Johnson with a statue in the Capitol are also an example of truly what is possible. And I think about how close Nellie Stone Johnson is to many of us. My mom actually told me a story just the other day about my grandma and Nellie in the kitchen of their house and the conversations that they would have as they were literally sewing patches in my mom's hand-me-down pants that had been worn by her three sisters before her. And so that for me is just a really good reminder that this is all so close. And there are so many things that are possible in this moment. So I look forward to being able to welcome Nellie into the Capitol, and also for truly what she represents. I'm grateful to all of you for doing all of the work over this past year, and for many of you on this call, many more years for this new addition to be possible. And so I'm challenging us to think about today's discussion and all of our future discussions on this board as an opportunity to build together and reimagine our work. Who are we hearing from? Does everyone know how to be heard? How are we listening? How can we be responsive to the many different visions of our Capitol that we know are out there? And how can we provide the space for those visions to be shared, understood, and realized? I'm excited for this conversation, and I hope that you are too. Today's focus won't be on the Columbus statue, but instead taking a step back and figuring out what is missing from our current process. Our work will be done when there is a clear and accessible process for Minnesotans to be seen and heard and valued. When Minnesotans do not feel that tearing down a statue is their only opportunity for change. We must make this work for them. So we're laying that groundwork for all of those future conversations that we know need to happen. And with that, I'd like to switch to the first order of business on the agenda. So as many of you may have seen, the governor recently announced a new appointment to the CAP board, and that is Dr. Kate Bean, who I'll introduce in just a moment, and who's with us today and the newest member of the CAP board. But first, I wanted to acknowledge and thank Ann Buck, who has joined us on this call. For those of you who don't know, Ann Buck has served on the CAP board since 1996. Over her 24 years on the board, she has been a member of the Executive Council and the Comprehensive Plan Committee. She has also served as vice chair elected by this board and has provided steady insight, valuable historical perspective, and a commitment to public dialogue during her service on the board. Thank you, Ann, for your service and for your service to this board, but most importantly, to your service of the people of Minnesota. I'm grateful for your leadership and contributions to the Capitol, and I think I speak for all of us on the board when I say what a pleasure it has been working with you. On Monday, the governor signed a certificate commending you for your service and thanking you on behalf of the state, and you should be receiving that in the mail sometime this week. And Ann, I was wondering if you wanted to just share a few words with the board at this time. The floor is yours.
I would love to. It has been truly my pleasure. It has been my honor to be on this board. It has been a delight to see the process of getting our Capitol restored. It has been one of my goals. We got there. We've got a few more things to do. The 2040 Comprehensive Plan is on its way, which will have a great effect to revitalize the area around the Capitol area. A lot of people don't realize we're just not a building or the grounds in front of it. We cover a great deal of area around, and we want to revitalize that. We have lots of small businesses that need help and support, and we've worked closely with them to get that moving forward. Our board has done so many things that people just don't know about, and it's been such a pleasure, and everyone on this board works so well together, and we may start from very different points. For some reason, we always manage to coalesce and come to a conclusion, just like I know with this very difficult subject of how are we going to deal with the artwork in and around the Capitol. We'll find a way, and we'll find a way that will be for the best of all of Minnesota, because this is our house, this is our land, and I hope everyone comes to see it and appreciate it and enjoy it. So it's my pleasure. Thank you. It's been fun working with you. And I can't tell you how much you're going to enjoy Kate. I've had the pleasure of spending some time with her. She's a great addition.
Thank you so much, Anne. We like rounds of applause. We appreciate you just so very much. And, you know, please continue to weigh in this process. We really are so grateful. So with that, I will transition into introducing you to the newest board, the newest member of the CAP board, who was appointed last week by the governor. Dr. Kate Bean is the Director of Native American Initiatives at the Minnesota Historical Society. As director, she works on engagement practices with regional Indigenous communities and advises the Historical Society on best practices for incorporating Native perspectives and voices on projects throughout the institution and historic sites. Dr. Bean teaches Dakota history at Minneapolis College, serves as a board member for the Native Governance Center, and is an Urban Indian Advisory Board member for the Minnesota Indian Affairs Council. Dr. Bean is a citizen of the Flanders Santee Sioux Dakota Tribal Nation. We are excited to welcome you to the board, Kate, and we look forward to working with you. And I'll go ahead and turn it over to you to share a few words with the board, if you'd like, just to introduce yourself.
Hamitakeapi, can you hear me? There I am. Hamitakeapi. Kebini makiapi e wakpai pakshan edomawapi. Bade wakantuanga wakpetua himacha yushkiamatiankapi. Hello, my relatives. As Peggy said, I'm Kate Bean. I'm a citizen of the Wakpai Pakshan Yate, the Flanders Santee Sioux tribe in South Dakota. Though we're originally from here, I'm a descendant of Heato Tue Badema Kaska, as well as Black Dogs Village, which is in present-day Eagan, Minnesota. And I'm just so happy to see you all here today. I really look forward to serving with each of you on the board and to working with community. I'm really incredibly humbled and just excited to be here. So, Pidamaya.
Yeah, there we go. Gitsi Miigwech, Dr. Bean, we are really happy to have you. And thank you for just being a part of the board and your willingness to serve in the governor's appointment. I will now read the oath of office for the CAP board and ask that you respond when I've finished reading it. So, do you, Kate Bean, solemnly swear to support the Constitution of the United States and the state of Minnesota, and to faithfully discharge your duties described in Minnesota Statute 15B as a member of the Capital Area Architectural and Planning Board to the best of your judgment and ability?
Ha imichi chuzete.
And with that, you are an official member of the CAP board. Welcome, and thank you again, Ann Buck, for your service. And I have an oath of office right here that we'll be signing to make it all official, Dr. Bean. So welcome aboard. So the last order of business in this section of the agenda is approval of the minutes from the March 10th meeting, which you should all received via email or snail mail, or maybe Paul dropped it off at your house, which also sometimes happens. But are there any edits to the minutes from March 10th?
Lieutenant Governor, this is Representative Dean. I would move the minutes, and there's one small edit. It's actually on page 5 in the second sentence, where it calls out Cross Anderson Local Development Team, and the minutes say Kimley Hora. It's actually Kimley Horn, so that A would become an N.
Thank you, Representative Dean, for your thorough reading of the minutes and catching that typo. We will make that correction in the minutes. So are there any additional corrections or additions to the minutes? Seeing that Representative Dean has moved a motion to approve the minutes for March 10th as corrected. Is there a second?
I will second. This is Alicia Belton.
Thank you, Alicia. All right, so motion seconded. All those in favor, actually, we need to
Madam
do
Chair?
a roll call.
That's exactly what your lawyer was about to tell you. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. That's why we have our attorneys on board here. So we'll go ahead and do that via roll call. Everyone did such a good job the first time. We could do it again. So here we go. Dr. Bean.
Yes.
Alicia Belden.
Present. Yes.
Representative Dean.
Yes.
Elaine Fink.
Yes.
Don Grundhauser.
Yes.
Representative Pertas.
Aye.
David Landegran.
Yes.
Ted Lentz.
Yes.
James McLean.
Yes.
Senator Nelson.
Aye.
Senator Pappas.
Yes.
And I, Lieutenant Governor, vote in favor of the motion. So thank you. The motion is approved and the March 10th meeting minutes are approved. We will now turn it over to the main presentation on today's agenda. So we're going to hear from Paul Mandel and David Kelleher, who will describe the statutory jurisdiction of the board and discuss existing policies on commemorative works, both inside and outside of the Capitol. And I venture to guess that we have more folks than usual who are tuning into to this conversation. And so I think it's a really great opportunity for people across the state of Minnesota to learn more about the CAP board and the jurisdiction relationships with the Historical Society and really help to level set in this moment. So Paul and David, please introduce yourselves to the board and the public and share a bit more about your roles before beginning your presentation. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Paul Mandel, Executive Secretary for the CAP Board. I was Principal Planner from 1987 to 2014, and then have been Executive Secretary since. The CAP Board was established in 1967 as a commission, then changed to a board with zoning authority over a 60-block area. So we have existed now for 54 years, and I have been here for 33 of those. We have control on zoning, both over state properties and private properties, including the hospital complex of Bethesda Hospital, part of Fairview, Sears, which will come forward at some point. And we also have design controls. The memorials on the Capitol grounds are generated through our office via architectural design competitions, as was the Nellie Stone Johnson piece. And the board, as you have heard from, represents 4 gubernatorial appointees, 3 mayoral appointees, and 4 legislators. With that, David, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, thanks, Paul, and thank you, Lieutenant Governor, for having us in to do this presentation. I'm David Kelleher, Director of Public Policy at the Minnesota Historical Society. We're a statewide organization, and more locally to the Capitol, our responsibility can be summed up as education and preservation. We run the tour program at the Capitol for school kids and families and tourists who come to the Capitol, and we also advise those involved with the Capitol on the preservation needs of the Minnesota State Capitol and its surroundings. It's great to be here. I have been involved with a number of the Capitol activities, including the Capitol Arts Subcommittee and working alongside many of my colleagues, including Brian Pease, who's the site manager at the Capitol Historic Site on the preservation project. So it's an honor to be here today, and again, thank you for spending some time walking through this information. Paul, I can dive into the grid that we're going to walk through unless you have some other introductory remarks on that front.
Go right ahead, Dave.
Thanks, Paul. What our assignment was to make simple who does what at the Minnesota State Capitol, and the Cap Board staff, with some input from Brian and myself, came up with this matrix or grid that describes essentially who does what for the different aspects of the Capitol. So a couple of things to orient you to this document, and members of the board received this in your meeting packet, so I hope you had a chance to take a look through it. The first page that you see up on the screen now is really a summary of responsibilities related to, as it's labeled, public and civic art in the State Capitol building and grounds. This does not talk about jurisdiction for space, which is a separate matter that the tenants, as they're called, of the Capitol building, the legislative branch, governor, attorney general, and of course the courts and others who are in the building have agreed among themselves how the space of the building is divided up. That's not addressed here. That's a separate matter.
David,
Yes?
I can just interrupt for a second. We would ask that everyone hold your questions until the end of this piece. We hope to be answering those questions with this presentation. This matrix was put together in the past week to 10 days by staff on both the Cap Board and Historical Society as a result of this board meeting being scheduled. So we hope we will answer your questions before you have to ask them. Thanks.
Thanks, Paul. For those of you who have a paper copy or a copy on your screen, just a quick orientation of this document. What's up on the screen now is the grid. The flip side of that is the statutory references, and thank you. There are many, and as you learn about them and see how everyone works together, it becomes a little more clear. There certainly are some gaps in the work that we do, but I think that between the two main statutes, which are the last footnotes, the Cap Board Authority and the Minnesota Historical Society Authority, that we'll refer back to frequently in this conversation, those can give you a statutory basis of who does what. So back to the main grid, the way that this is organized, if you look at the column that starts Capitol Building, Historic and Ceremonial Public Spaces, and then go down that column, the way this is organized, it goes from inside out. So inside the building with historic and ceremonial spaces, other spaces inside the building, then the outside of the building, and then the ground. So that's a helpful way to think of it. Some of the most significant historic spaces that are treated a specific way, and then other spaces that are not as highly significant historically, and then moving outside the building. So with that, Paul and I will tag team walking through this grid briefly and then open it up to discussion. So as I mentioned, the statute contemplates historic and ceremonial public spaces, and those are in observation of the vision of Cass Gilbert, the architect of the Capitol, some of the most significant historic spaces inside the building that are worthy of preservation, and that not only is mentioned in state statute, but was one of the guiding principles of the Capitol Preservation Project, is to preserve the vision of Cass Gilbert in this amazing building, the People's House. So looking at those historic and ceremonial spaces first, Paul, you want to jump into?
Excuse me. Cap Board and Historical Society both share review and approval, and by statute, Historical Society has the final approval for those spaces that are defined, things like the governor's reception room, the rotunda, the chambers, what you think of as the most public spaces that have the visitors and ceremonial spaces. The Department of Administration is the landlord And if you go down one space, the temporary exhibit spaces inside the Capitol building, interior public spaces created with the 2017 renovation, there's 30 to 40,000 new square feet, mostly on the 3rd floor east wing, where there's an exhibit space, several other rooms, including the Cass Gilbert Library, which is at the end of the hall connecting the 2 corridors, and the basement space, including the new L'Étoile des Nord vault, which is below the rotunda by 2 stories. Those spaces were created. They are not historic. They are new. Most people never even saw them in their current state now that they've been restored. And Historical Society reviews and approves that work that goes on in there, along with the temporary exhibits that are involved with Capitol Preservation Art Subcommittee, of which Historical Society and Cap Board are ex officio members. Then you go to the minor spaces on the next row down, the corridors and offices. We have review both for us and the Historical Society is strictly advisory, as is the admin and care and upkeep, again, falling under admin as the landlord. Then you get to the Capitol building exterior, and again, Cap Board and Historical Society have the review and full approval of that, as we were involved with the Capitol Preservation Commission work and ongoing. Department Administration implements as the landlord, upkeep, care, and review, and they will maintain the building. They're responsible for both the maintenance and upkeep of the building, interior and exterior, that keep it in such good condition. And then lastly, you get to the Capitol grounds, what we call the Capitol campus, and often the Capitol Mall, which includes public streets. The Cap Board is responsible for concept approval and have been, since I first came, that was the first memorial space that was actually created with the Vietnam Memorial, and other memorials in the lower mall, the Military Family Tribute, the Peace Officers Memorial, Firefighters, Korean Memorial, Workers Memorial, Women's Suffrage Garden, which is being renovated as we speak with state dollars to prepare it for the 100th anniversary of the amendment passing, and that will be celebrated on August 26th. So the garden, the walls, everything about it is being renovated and restored to its original condition. Those go through design, both siting and design concept and approval by the Cap Board through architectural design competitions. And then we're responsible for, as the statute says, review of any and all changes, new or existing, on the Capitol grounds to both lands and public buildings. And then, David, if you want to pick up there.
And then as you move over to the right on the last row of the grid, Capitol, Campus, and Mall, the Minnesota Historical Society's role in this area is 2 parts. One is advice on preservation. So over the years, we have advised Cap Board and administration on best practices for conserving the statues and the memorials and monuments, on how they do best in the weather, for example, those kinds of things. And if repairs are needed, making sure that they're done the right way so that they'll last a long time. And then the second bullet there is, if there are monuments, memorials, or other artwork to be removed, then the statute says that final disposition, which we'll get into this later, but is a specific term that we use in the museum field, rests with the Minnesota Historical Society. So anything that is taken out of the Capitol Mall, the Minnesota Historical Society would have a choice on whether to receive that item for Minnesota Historical Society's collections. And then, of course, going over to the final row, admin, of course, does care and upkeep of the mall as well as the building. And Paul, I think just one little edit to this grid that we should do is in the first row where it says Capitol Building, Historic and Ceremonial Public Spaces, we certainly should acknowledge the Department of Administration's role in the care and upkeep of those ceremonial spaces, because they do a great job, and we've worked with admin on best practices for preservation of a important historic building.
Correct. And Madam Chair, one correction, I said including the public streets. The public streets obviously are under different jurisdiction, be it MnDOT, City of St. Paul, we have county roads, we have vacated streets that are under the Department of Administration. So there are the public streets, which would not have been vacated, are not part of our jurisdiction, although we do get consulted. And Senator Nelson has a hand up, Madam Chair, if you wish to call on her at this point.
Nelson.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question, and actually then I assume we're going to be approving this. What I wanted to note was in the middle column, Minnesota Historical Society, at the bottom of the page, on grounds, Capitol campuses and mall excluding public streets. We just had the brief comments regarding, I'd refer you to bullet point 2, which says, for monuments and memorials to be removed, review and final disposition according to 138.68, and that's under the Minnesota Historical Society's jurisdiction. I do believe, though, especially in light of what happened on our Capitol on June 10th, that we want to make sure that it's for monuments and memorials to be lawfully removed. There's a big difference between lawful removal and vandalism and defacing Capitol property. And so I would move that we add the word into this document, because we know that founding documents are important, that bullet point 2 in that in that chart says that for monuments and memorials to be lawfully removed. So I would move that we insert the word lawfully removed. I do not believe that we want to talk about those monuments that have been removed illegally. And so I would make that motion, Madam Chair, that we include the word lawful. Lawfully.
Nelson, I appreciate your perspective. That is actually the purpose of this meeting, is to review the current statutes that exist. My understanding, and Paul or David or Nathan to weigh in here, is that actual change in statute would need to be made by the legislature. Is that correct?
Madam Chair, I just want to acknowledge that Representative Hurthouse and Representative Dean have raised their hands to be called on too. This document was meant to serve as a working document. This is certainly not, we're not looking at rulemaking or anything else like that. This was meant simply to inform this board meeting. David, I don't know.
Well, I would add this, exactly, this document is a summary of existing law. And if you scroll down or flip over to the second page of this document, the last footnote says Minnesota Historical Society, thank you, statutory authority. The last 2 lines there are an excerpt straight from that statute, which obviously this group cannot amend the statute. That's up to the legislature and the governor to do that. And really, this grid is an attempt to summarize what it says in statute. And that line says, disposition of any monuments, memorials, or works of art removed from the state capitol or capitol grounds.
And so I'm trying to pull up the statute here to look at it in its entirety. And are you saying, I would like you to read the statute in its entirety, if you could please, or if you have it Is this, I don't see the end of the quotes here. Footnote 6, is that the statute in its entirety?
That is
138.68.
138 in its entirety, and again, that last sentence reads, the Minnesota State Historical Society shall have final authority over the disposition of any monuments, memorials, or works of art removed from the state capitol or the state capitol grounds.
Thank you. And Madam Chair?
Yes, Senator.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So we see who makes the laws, and we understand. I will just note for the record that I do not believe that Minnesota Statute 138.68 would apply to a statute that has been illegally removed, really, with up to a $10,000 fine and 5 years of imprisonment. I do not believe that that is, and I can see where we need to further define our law. I think when Minnesota Statute 138.68 was written, I'm sure that there was absolutely no conception in anyone's mind that Minnesotans would see vandalism, destruction, and illegal defacing of public property on our Capitol Mall. But as you've noted, Madam Chair, it's not just Minnesota. These things are happening across our state and nation. I think it is imperative that we update our laws accordingly, and would ask that as we move forward, statutory authority from the Minnesota Historical Society rests with those that have been lawfully removed. So with that, I want to just make that point that I would not expect that the Minnesota Historical Society would be determining what to do with the statute that has been illegally, removed.
Madam Chair.
Noted, Senator. Go ahead, Paul.
Representative Hurthouse and Representative Dean have their hands raised. If you.
Absolutely. Representative Hurthouse.
Well, thank you, Mr. Secretary, Madam Chair, and Mr. Kelleher, thank you for putting this grid together in preparation for this meeting and knowing it was happening before the packet was prepared. Was certainly doing some work in trying to determine who has authority over what. And it's very clear that there are all these different spaces that different groups or different entities have some input on. I also understand that this meeting is to discuss process and not about what happened. So I will try to keep my focus to the process here. Mr. Kelleher, the grid as it's arranged in each of the areas, which is the far left column, makes first purview or overview by the CAP board on all of those areas. Then it moves to the Historical Society, and then finally at the far right has the administrative department. So in my world, in real estate, if I come forward with a proposal for a preliminary plat, I have to go through one layer before I go to the next layer before I get final approval. So do you have this grid arranged in such a manner that any of these are the first step, second step, third step in terms of final approval? Is that what you're laying out here as the process, or are they not necessarily follow in any order, that they just need the aye or the nay from each of these different entities?
Madam Chair, that's a really good question. I don't think that this grid was written with that process flow or sequence in mind, but rather thinking about the spaces as I would think of them as most historic, and then sort of this concept of going from inside out as a way to organize the thought. Your comment is a good segue into another piece, and I'm not sure if we can scroll down a little bit on this grid. There's a section on the bottom of this sheet that says policy references, and we should make a mention of those two policies as well. I don't see that that's coming up on the screen, but great, thank you. There are two existing policies that that we go by for guidance on artwork inside and outside the Capitol. The document that's showing on the screen right now, the cover of that document labeled Policy for Works of Art in the Minnesota State Capitol, is a document that the Cap Board and the Minnesota Historical Society have worked on for a number of years, made revisions to over the years, going back to the 90s, with the most recent revision in 2015. After many of the conversations that took place about artwork inside the Capitol when the Capitol Preservation Project was going on, with the art subcommittee and the relocation of various paintings inside the building, we thought that it was time to take a look at this policy and update a number of aspects of it. Our governing board, called the Executive Council, when that Capitol Art activity was happening, because they were going to have to make a decision on whether or not to relocate art, they formed a subcommittee to have those conversations and make those decisions. So that group has gotten started. We agreed with the Cap Board that we would take a first shot at doing a revision of this policy, and we're still working on it. It's something that has gone to the middle burner, if not the back burner, but I think it's going to get pulled out to the front burner pretty quickly to keep moving forward on doing some revisions. So we will keep working on that. Then we will work with the Cap Board staff and the board itself for some revisions. And again, this is primarily dealing with works of art on the inside of the Capitol that we had, very thorough discussions about in the period when the Capitol Preservation Project was happening. The second document that I'll just mention and then let Paul make some further comments on is labeled Policy for Commemorative Works in the Minnesota State Capitol Area. Most recent revision of this was February 2012, and this deals with monuments, memorials, and works of art outside the building. And both of these documents contain some really great background on the philosophy of having artwork, what it means, what it meant in its time, what memorials mean, and what they meant in their time. So Paul, I don't know if you want to add anything to that on the commemorative works.
Yeah. First of all, I would ask, because we have over 70 people watching the live stream, the chat is meant to be used only for technical questions. If you have a question of substance or about the subject matter, we would ask that you use your raised hand function so that we meet the letter of the law for open meeting law.
And Madam Chair, I had a couple follow-up questions.
Okay. In addition, the commemorative works, this document is thorough in announcing and spelling out for any that come to the Capitol, who come to the Cap Board, who come to the legislature, etc., how you get a memorial added to the Capitol grounds. This would be Vietnam Memorial, Korean Memorial, military family tribute, the ones I listed earlier. And for the public's information, because several press members had asked me earlier today, there is on the Cap Board website, mn.gov/CAAPB, there is you can see all the memorials and statues on the exterior of the mall with full details and pictures. And there is an inventory listed of all the artwork inside the Capitol building on that page. And you basically go to our website, mall, memorials, and statues, and you can find all that information. But it's spelled out very clearly from when you have an idea for a memorial to how it has to be implemented, how we do design competitions, how you have to fundraise, and with the exception of a few memorials on the Capitol grounds, they have all involved both private and state dollars, On average, and I've been quoted to this effect by several media sources, it generally, to get a memorial on the Capitol grounds, takes 3 to 5 years on average, and $450,000 because we create statue, but we also create public space. I will recognize that Representative Dean still has his hand raised also, but that's enough for now.
Thank you, Paul. Representative Hertas, you mentioned that you have a couple of follow-ups, and I will then go to Representative Dean and then suggest that we get back on track with the rest of the presentation and then open it up for discussion. Representative Hertas.
Opening comments, it was noted that there does not appear to be a process for removal of art, but this grid seems to suggest that there is a process, and it's so footnoted with footnote number 6 with regarding the Minnesota Historical Societies.
Representative Hertas, you are on mute.
Thank you. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you.
All right. I mentioned while I was muted that it was mentioned in the introduction that there's not a process for removing the art. And I realize that most works of art or monuments as such are erected with the intention and at considerable cost to be there in perpetuity as a memoriam. And so we don't probably think about the process, but nonetheless, it's footnoted in the grid that was put together at footnote number 6 that Minnesota Historical Society under statute 13868 does have a process or is final authority over removal of art. And so with that in mind, I guess I was a little curious if Mr. Kelleher could answer when it gets to a decision, and there was a controversy just a few years ago during the Capitol restoration about the removal of art in the governor's reception area and whether or not it should be removed from the Capitol entirely, whether it should be relocated, whether some of it comes to the Minnesota Historical Society. And of course, art is subjective and means a lot of different things to different people and has different interpretations. I had this conversation similarly last week. I serve as a trustee on the MIA board, the Minnesota Institute of Arts, and we were discussing the nature of art and its purpose, oftentimes controversial or political in nature to stimulate people's thinking and social consciousness. But Mr. Kelleher, if it gets down to the point where the Minnesota Historical Society is determining the final disposition, my question to you, because I'm not familiar with the processes within Minnesota Historical Society, who or what group of individuals at MHS really makes these final decisions, and what is their review process? Are there public meetings? Are there published hearings? You know, how does that work? Because this is all going to play into knowing these different layers that people are going to have to go through to erect monuments as well as remove them, to go through these different layers in terms of affecting a change. And you noted, somebody noted that it takes 5 years and considerable additional cost to create public spaces around it. I can't help but recall that an interview at the time that the statute in question was torn down, one of the leaders and presumably one of the perpetrators of that event was asked whether or not there was a process, and he acknowledged on live television as I watched it that yes, there is, but we just can't wait. And so apparently there was an urgency on the part of some group or some individuals to ignore the process entirely. And so I understand we're here today to help clean this up and have a pathway on how these things would be dealt with in the future. But, you know, it's just not clear to me with this grid laid out if you have to go through CAP board first and get approval there before you move on to Historical Society, and then after that get approval from admin, or whether it's any nature of where you start and what the process is. So to my question about how it works at MHS, because this is obviously a decision by MHS would influence whether something's approved or disapproved or removed.
Representative Cortez, thank you for your question. Mr. Kelleher, I will have you answer that, but I also think, Mr. Mandel, it's probably important for you to weigh in here as well.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Representative Hertaus, if you take a look at that footnote, making the distinction between inside the Capitol building and outside the Capitol building, there's a different process as outlined on the grid. And for works of art, memorials, monuments that are out.
David, you just got muted.
Okay, I think I unmuted myself, so let me know if this works.
Yes.
If you look at that last sentence of 138.68 that says the Minnesota State Historical Society shall have final authority over the disposition of any monuments, memorials. What that means is that if a work of art that is removed from the mall, the state capitol or capitol grounds, as the statute says, then the Minnesota Historical Society has jurisdiction over what happens to that physical work of art or memorial. So disposition of any monuments, disposition is a term that we use in the museum field. So our authority in that sentence is about the work of art. So if we were going to have something go into collections to be used for an exhibit later, for example. Inside the building, we do have recent experience, and if you look in that section of statute, a few sentences above, it says no works of art, maybe, and I'm trying to read the small print here, sorry, no monument, memorial, or work of art can be relocated or removed or placed in such areas in any way without the approval of the Minnesota State Historical Society. So our recent experience with that section of the law for inside the building came about when the proposal was to move several paintings, including 2 paintings in the governor's reception room. And we have a governing board called the Executive Council. That group appointed a subcommittee, and that subcommittee had numerous discussions about whether we should do that. I would add that conversation was also backed up by the Capitol Preservation Commission's Art Subcommittee, which had many hearings, public meetings, 12 public meetings around the state. So there was plenty of consultation and public input on that aspect of it. So Representative Hertaus, I hope I've answered your question that really the last sentence of that section of statute talks about what happens with materials that are removed, and that's the Historical Society's jurisdiction, or outside the building, and then inside the building, it's a different process, and I hope I've described the process that we've used in the past for.
Thank you, that was helpful.
And Madam Chair, we are served by an Attorney General, representative of the Attorney General's office, who will be working with us through this process. He is on the phone for this meeting. We, our statute 15B.08 subdivision 3 does state that we must approve any and all changes to the public grounds and to the public buildings. And I'll keep it brief because I see that Representative Dean and Kate Bean and Senator Nelson again have questions, so I'll leave it to you.
Yes, thank you, Paul. Let's go ahead and go to Representative Dean. Dr. Bean, you're on deck, and then we'll go to Senator Nelson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I think that this is why we're here, to begin to have this conversation. Clearly, you know, statute 138.68 spells out some things about, you know, the authority of the Minnesota Historical Society. And I'm not going to ask David Kelleher what their form looks like for someone who wants to submit for the removal of a memorial on the mall, because I'm guessing they don't have one. And we have a process in place for trying to establish a memorial or a monument, but I don't believe we really have a process by decommissioning one. Let's use a word similar to that. And you know, I will say that, you know, the thought of having illegal or other things written into the statute 138.68, we have a criminal code statute 609, which is where we write things that are illegal. I don't think throughout all our other statutes we talk about illegal or other types of things. So that's a conversation that I think is left for another day and another conversation. You know, in the end, I think the urgency of doing something like this is really, really critical. I mean, I was involved in some of the conversations in 2015 regarding art at the Capitol. We had many long debates on what is art, how do you document history? You know, that was a question that early on in architecture school, I looked at, you know, what history do you pick? You know, something's historical. Well, who's determining what point in history? I mean, you know, is it 30 years ago? Is it 100 years ago? Is it 500 years ago? Those are all critical questions. And I think that our role here is not to debate what all of those questions are, but ultimately to talk about, we need to have a process. I mean, I look at the mall and I think it's beautiful and we're responsible for keeping open space and all those other things. Do we have any process for, you know, removing any monuments? Because, you know, 10, 20, 100 years from now, there are going to be other things that happen in our state that we want to commemorate with a memorial. So I just hope that we can keep sort of discussing this and realize that we don't have a process. We need to develop that process, and there needs to be clarity. I think the grid helps us a little bit with some clarity, but you know, we have three very, you know, what I would say, some ways, boards and commissions and historical society that overlap at points, and I think it's important to be cognizant of that, and I think that should be involved in our dialogue as we talk about the future of the Capitol monuments and other memorials. So I'm really excited to see the next statue and memorial to Nellie Stone Johnson going up in the Capitol when that happens. And I'm so excited that the process is going well, and we do have things to look forward to. And I'm guessing there might be some people that object to that as well. But you know, I'm sure there are some people that object to Floyd B. Olson monument, and ultimately that's why we need a process. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative Bean. Dr. Bean.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, you know, the previous comment about one of the community members who participated in the removal of the Columbus statue stating we couldn't wait. I just want to remind everyone here today that this is not something that happened overnight. I think there has been a community process that has been building over the years. And as an urban Native community member, I do know that our community has been asking for certain changes for a very long time. I think that I'm incredibly excited to see that we are talking about this process. Strictly because of the fact that there has been a lack of knowledge of what the process is, and as we're seeing here today, sometimes no process, and also a lack of faith in the process for community members. And I just really look forward to, you know, talking about process in a way that is inclusive of community members whose voices have historically been left out and not been at the table for some of these issues.
Thank you, Dr. Bean. Senator Nelson.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. And I appreciate the comments, the good comments on a process, which I believe we will begin today. And I appreciate the thoughtful discussion leading up to today's meeting as well. And also Dr. Bean's comments. And Madam Chair, you are in an extraordinary position of leadership regarding monuments, art, history at our Capitol. And I noted Dr. Bean's concern that sometimes people don't know how to access their government and get involved and have their voice heard. And that's one of the best things we can do, is make sure that everybody's voices are heard. And Madam Chair, in your leadership role, had anyone ever spoken to you about wanting to remove the statue of Christopher Columbus?
Senator Nelson, to your question, I think I would go back to Dr. Bean's comments, that this is something that folks have talked about in the American Indian community for quite some time broadly. I certainly have not personally made any doubts known about my own feelings about that particular statue. However, I take my role very seriously as the chair of the CAP board to make sure that we do have a robust process. But when we talk about, like, has anyone talked to me about that before? I've had conversations with other Native parents about their children who see that statue when they come here, and that it delivers a false narrative about the discovery of people who are already here, and the glorification of a man, by his own admission, who sold 9 and 10-year-old girls into sex slavery. That is also a conversation that we have to have within our own community about the issues that have been raised there. And so it certainly is something that has been talked about. But I'll also say this, that I think, now that we have the People of Color and Indigenous Caucus, which when this Capitol was created, I don't know that folks could have seen that as a possibility. That things are changing, and I think that we're ready to have this conversation. And Senator Nelson, as a teacher, I'm sure that you can appreciate that we absolutely need to educate our Minnesotans on the history, the full history, the true history, and our young people can hear it and can take it. And it is really our obligation to share that with them, and that's part of this process.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I would say, of course, that is key, is that education and that historical education. I would just note 2 brief things. There is a process, there will be a process, and I think it's unfortunate that in your role as the CAP board president here for 1.5 years, that process did not ensue sooner. So I do look forward to getting that process in place. I do believe that's important. And I would note that I don't believe women were involved either when our Capitol was built. So I'm very glad to see that we are becoming and have become a more inclusive society. I would ask, though, if Mr. Mandel could discuss briefly, because we've butt up against this a number of times, where our current sensibilities and what we know to be true and how we feel about inclusiveness today and actions today, things that we would not tolerate today, but were part of our past. Those things we have butt up against those a number of times, and I don't believe that we can remove our history by tearing down statues or removing paintings, but we can and we should, I believe, reinterpret that history. This is what we knew then. This is how we felt then. But today, we know that we don't tolerate those type of acts, and here's why. And I think we might be missing a great teaching moment if we believe that the best way to not repeat history is to tear down historical markers. I would much rather that we actually teach through those. And I'm wondering if Mr. Mandel can talk about, we have a history of doing that, quite frankly, on the CAP board. And I'm wondering if Mr. Mandel could talk a bit about what did we do in our Capitol Rotunda when we were faced with a monument that was installed inside the Capitol in the rotunda that had some not only inaccuracies, but some thought perhaps the person who commissioned that was actually discriminatory in his actions and words. And yet we did not tear down that monument. And I'm wondering if Mr. Mandel can describe how we handled that in the Capitol Rotunda when we found ourselves faced with a monument that was not accurate, and it was discriminatory towards some people. How did we handle that, Mr. Mandel?
Mr. Mandel, I will ask you to keep your comments brief and then would redirect Mr. Mandel and Mr. Kelleher to please conclude your presentation. And then if there are additional comments, it's clear to me that we deserve an opportunity to have more time and a more robust discussion, and folks should expect that shortly. But please go ahead, Mr. Mandel and Mr. Kelleher.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In the late 90s, there was a group called the Philippine Study Group that had a temporary exhibit in the Capitol and approached the CAP board with written requests, petitions, and background information about, I believe it was the first volunteer, but it's a plaque in the Capitol Rotunda on the north side about the Spanish-American War that stated that it quoted this, it cited the number of Americans that died winning independence for the Philippines from the Spanish, and that the chief, and I don't remember his name, was very, very grateful. CAP board revised those policies that are now been revised in 2015 for works of art inside the Capitol. Working with that group and working with Historical Society, we arrived at, first of all, the Americans kicked out the Spanish, and then the Filipinos had to kick out the Americans. So it failed to talk about the Filipinos that died in winning independence, and it also mentioned the chief, who was a duly elected president in addition to being a chief. So it was decided, and it was, I think it was a very well-received resolution, that instead of replacing the plaque or getting rid of it, we added a new plaque, made it look like part of the original plaque, and is now located above that plaque, correcting all the inaccuracies and the misstatements. And now both those plaques, they look almost identical, except that we've included artwork in the new one. So all the corrections were made to the satisfaction of the group and full acceptance of the board and Historical Society.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. And I think, what that actually illustrates is that there isn't a one size fits all, and that the engagement is going to need to look different depending on, what it is that we're talking about. And so I think that this conversation again is just very timely. So Mr. Mandel and Mr. Kelleher would just invite you to conclude your presentation. If there are additional questions or comments, we can engage in this at that time. If you have finished asking your question, if you could please click on the hand raise icon to take that down, so I know who's in the queue. Thank you.
And Madam Chair, Dave, I'm concerned with where things are now.
We've got through our presentation and item C, past actions taken using existing policies. In the conversation, we covered the examples that we had planned on using for that item. So I think we're done with that section, and we've obviously covered some of item 4, gaps or missing standards. We'll obviously continue to work on that piece of it, as Paul mentioned, working with the Attorney General, staff person, to make sure that we make a full inventory of where the gaps are. So we're done.
And
for now.
Madam Chair, I will say that at the end of the board meeting, before we turn off, we will be showing a slide that illustrates both the mailing address for the CAP board, as well as an email address, and our website will have, before the end of the week, I would say, a means of inputting your comments. So in effect, that would be for anyone that has any comments, input, etc.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Representative Hertas, I believe your hand is raised. Did you have an additional comment or question?
No, I did not. I guess my hand remains raised. Thank you.
Thank you. And I would open it up if there's additional folks who have questions. We have quite a full list of our board members. I believe everyone is in attendance. So if there's anyone else who has a question or comment, I'd entertain that at this time. Senator Nelson, I believe your hand is raised again.
Yes.
Go right ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I certainly would rather others speak first if they like, since I've spoken several times. But I'm wondering if we might have the folks here today who could answer a couple questions, and I'm thinking we might. One has to do with where is the Christopher Columbus statue that was illegally torn down, and what kind of damage did it sustain? What do we anticipate might happen with that? And you know, what was the worth of that statue? Just kind of, I don't know that I've read that in any of the news reports, and so I think Minnesotans want to know that. I know I do. And then the other question might also, if we have someone, I think you mentioned, Madam Chair, from the Attorney General's office on the call, it'd also be good to know, has there been, has that person or people who not only said they would tear down the statue and gave ample hours notice, then did so on, maybe it was a live Facebook stream or YouTube stream, have they been arrested yet? What's the status of that? So what's the status of Christopher Columbus, that statue, and what's the status of the people who vandalized and defaced the Capitol property?
So Senator Nelson, I can answer your second question first, and then I would refer actually over to Commissioner Roberts Davis for the first question that you asked. My understanding is that the BCA is doing an investigation, watching the video, determining who is responsible, and doing a full investigation at this time. I certainly can't comment with regards to what decision they will make, because that is not the role of the Lieutenant Governor to get involved with the decisions of law enforcement. But I do know it is currently under investigation, and that's the update that I can give you at this time. Commissioner Roberts Davis.
We can't, you're coming across unknown. No.
I'm sorry, I'm asking, I don't know what to say.
Commissioner, can you turn off your camera? That might help.
Okay. So,
unfortunately, Commissioner Roberts Davis, we're having a difficult time hearing you. I think if it's all right, I would hand that over to David Kelleher from the Historical Society, who I believe also has an answer to this question.
Madam Chair, unfortunately, Commissioner Roberts Davis is in a better position to answer than I am. I don't know. I don't have an answer where the statue is. I know that it was removed from the Capitol grounds on that day, but I don't have any further information than that. It's not in our possession at the Minnesota.
So unfortunately, here's what I'm gonna suggest is that we have Commissioner Chris. Can you answer that question? Chris Givens from the Department of Administration.
Yeah, Madam Chair, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. I can hear you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Chris Given here. I'm the Director of Facilities Management on the Capitol Complex. The Christopher Columbus statue is at a joint MnDOT DPS facility in the metro. It's stored inside, and that's where it sits. It does have damage. We had a damage estimate done to it by the contractor and the consultant that are currently refurbishing the monuments on the Capitol Complex, the other monuments, and the damage was estimated at $154,000 to replace, to bring it, if we were to replace it, to bring it back to the condition it was. We had, not only the bronze was damaged from falling onto the pavement, but the base of it, as well as some of the paving stones that are part of the monument itself. And I think Michael Bjornberg was part of that assessment, so he could speak to the details of the estimate if they're there. But it is, that's where it's stored, and that's what the estimate was made to repair the monument.
Madam Chair, I'm told that Board Member Alicia Belton does not have the function working for her raised hand, but she would like to. And also Kate Bean and Representative Hurthouse again have hands raised, I believe.
Okay, excellent. I'm sure that Mr. Bjornberg would be willing to share additional information, and we absolutely can get that to the board with the condition of the statue itself. But I'm, in the interest of time, we'll continue to move on. So with that, Dr. Bean.
Yeah, I just would like to mention very briefly that in terms of, this is a national issue, obviously, that we're in the midst of. And I think that we have a lot of examples around the country and around the world of ways in which these statues, these monuments have been reutilized and sort of reset. And there is a lot of different kinds of opportunity for that. And I think it is really, really important. One thing I would like to mention is that for Indigenous people, having a statue like this in front of the state capitol is, for us, it's as if there were a capital of Adolf Hitler at the Capitol. And do we put on a plaque to reinterpret that, the horrors that are associated with individuals? Or do we do something more? And do we include community? I think it's incredibly important to think about these things and to think about the ways in which these structures have such an emotional impact on community members who should feel welcome at our State House.
Madam Chair, Alicia Belton would, I think she can speak, but she can't raise her hand.
Okay, no problem. Ms. Belton, the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you, Madam Chair. I would just say that, I appreciate hearing everybody's comments. It's really helpful because this is what this process is about, so that we can hear everybody's viewpoint. But I would say this: when we know better, we do better. And so the idea of a previous solution where you had a plaque next to a monument that was having some question. Maybe that was an appropriate solution for that time. You're talking about how do we reinterpret history. I would say that whose perspective are we telling, and whose story are we telling? Because the stories have multiple sides. So I would just say, as we move forward, let's examine that just to make sure that we are including people who don't always have a chance to participate. And I would also say that we shouldn't willingly do things that we know are hurting people. When people are coming to see these monuments, people's hearts are breaking. And so I think that's something, as we move forward, that we need to consider. So that's what I would offer.
Thank you, Ms. Belton. Representative Hurthouse.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I don't think it was our mission today to adjudicate what happened with the monument as such. And I did reach out, just because somebody had asked what the status was. I reached out to Colonel Langer, who's in charge of the State Patrol, and obviously he cannot comment on an ongoing investigation, other than to assure me that his department, as well as in cooperation with the BCA, we're still doing that ongoing investigation. And when they're completed with it, it'll be turned over to the Ramsey County Attorney's Office, which would have charging jurisdiction. What I do know under statute is that the maximum penalty is 5 years, $10,000 fine, a felony conviction. So that's the maximum charge that can happen for damaging $154,000 of property that we were just had disclosed to us. So anyway, I don't think it does any good for any of us to try to defend or adjudicate this at this meeting. This is about process and making sure that this doesn't ever happen again.
Thank you, Representative. I'm going to go to Senator Pappas.
Thank you. I actually thought the purpose of this meeting was a broader discussion about, you know, how we look at the monuments and paintings that we have, and how we develop a process to remove those that seem inappropriate. So I think I feel a little bit sidelined by the heavy emphasis on the Columbus statue. I think people are interested in that. I have questions about, for example, how much would it cost to remove the entire statue? But I do think when we only have an hour and a half, that it would have been more helpful if we focused more on the broader issues, as some of our members did allude to, on how we develop a process. I think perhaps had we had a process in place, because this has been a sore point for a number of years, this Columbus statue, then I think the community might not have resorted to an extreme effort of moving it on their own. So I'd like us to focus again on how we can have that broader conversation.
Thank you, Senator, and that is your comment is very timely as we move into talking about transitioning into next steps. It is very clear to me that we have a real need to ensure that we have a more robust conversation about process, and while maybe those of you who are part of the CAP board or who were appointed to the CAP board by various jurisdictions or by the House or Senate did not expect to be spending so much time working on CAP board issues, I guess I would just say, please get ready because we are going to be calling on you much more frequently to have these conversations. And Senator Pappas, to your point, I believe that the intention of this conversation today was certainly to talk more about process. I think there is certainly the removal of a statue is on people's minds during this time, and that certainly did take up quite a bit of the conversation, and we need to continue the conversation about the process that will be in place broadly for not just one statue, but for memorials, monuments, artwork, et cetera, as a whole, to make sure that people feel seen, heard, and valued.
Madam
So, yes.
If I may, just, I don't know if you want to, the commissioner is available via audio feed at this point, if you have desire to.
I would actually say, Commissioner, I feel like Mr. Given answered sufficiently. We also heard about the damage of the statue. I feel satisfied. If additional members would like to follow up with you, I think that's appropriate. I am cognizant of time and the fact that we are running over, and so I would like to move the meeting along if that's all right.
Agreed. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. So with that, as we move forward with this discussion, it's very clear that the work before us will involve more than just a meeting or two. It's also clear that the COVID pandemic presents a bit of a challenge to us for the type of really meaningful dialogue that is so critical for us to be able to do our work well. So the CAP board has the job also of updating and continuing to the good work of the comprehensive plan, which in and of itself is a big task. So all of this work, which is very much interrelated, needs to continue for the foreseeable months and years, and not just weeks. So With that in mind, I will be creating 2 working groups that will consist of members of the CAP board, along with some members of the public as well, that will be focused on 2 key elements of this conversation. The first group will focus on the policy and process-based questions that have arisen today. And it will conduct a more comprehensive review of the policies and processes in place now. And importantly, it will discuss the forms or lack thereof that the public can use to engage in this process. It will engage the public on the barriers to the more formal parts of this process. And then we'll draft a possible likely policy and generate process-based documents that can make the process more accessible. This policy and process group will then present to the full meeting of the CAP board in the future with the results of its work and the recommendations as it has generated. But again, I want to be absolutely clear that we will move forward together as a board. And that is very important, I think, to the good work and making sure that people feel heard. The second group will focus on a larger conversation around what is a shared vision of what the Capitol can and should look like. It will create intentional spaces for members of the public to comment and dialogue about what the Capitol means to them and how they do or don't see themselves reflected in this building now. It will also focus on bringing in all perspectives of our shared history to the Capitol in order to contextualize CAP board conversations about commemorative work, but also things like the Sears site and other items of business that we will be addressing in the coming years. Importantly, it will work that this second group does will build off of the work that the Capitol Preservation Committee's Art Subcommittee completed about 5 years ago during the restoration of the Capitol. The work of that subcommittee is summarized in a thorough report, and I think will help to inform the foundation of the second group's work. More details about this work will be available in the coming weeks, but I encourage you, please, to reach out with suggestions or thoughts that you may have. So just wanted to bring that forward and say that this is incredibly important. And as we talk about the comprehensive plan and all of the work that has gone into that, I think more people need to know about it. And more people need to know that there is a plan for the Capitol. And one of the things, Mr. Mandel, that we have talked about before is how do we make sure that there's an engagement process? How are we hearing from folks? Is it surveys of folks who are already here at the Capitol? Or do we want to make sure that we're reaching out to people who may never have been to the Capitol before, but this is still their house and they need to feel welcomed and valued every time they come to the Capitol and come to the ground? So at the same time that these groups will be doing their work, the Minnesota Historical Society will be hosting conversations about the monuments, memorials, and commemorative art in Minnesota. To learn more about that work, Kevin Mila, the Deputy Director of Initiatives of the Minnesota Historical Society, is with us today. And Kevin, if you could just very briefly, because we're over time, just share a little bit about yourself and the work that you and the Historical Society will be doing over the coming months.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor. Board, I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you just briefly about plans that we have to provide some context around memorials and memorialization in Minnesota. This conversation has really highlighted a lot of the things I wrote up, which I will now skip over, about why this conversation is so important. We referenced a number of memorials, plaques, items not only in the Capitol, but also around the state. And as an organization that is best suited to provide historical context and opportunities for conversation about these things for the public, we know that is a role we can play in the coming months and years, because this is an issue that I believe will be with us for a long period of time. I truly appreciate, as someone who's been in this field in museum education and history for 25 years, this sort of opportunity for conversation that comes up. And both Representative Dean and Senator Nelson referenced, among other people, the importance of having conversations that include many different perspectives, because one contextual piece about memorials is they are a product of their time, not necessarily the event that they are trying to commemorate. And as a product of their time, they often are narrowly presented, and at times that excludes and frequently minimizes different perspectives. And the Columbus statue, I think, is a really good example of that. So as the Historical Society, 2 steps that we are taking. One is we're creating a series of articles that provide historical context about memorials. And the first 2 of those are up on our website right now. One is about the Columbus Memorial. The second is about the Soldiers and Sailors Monument that stands between the Minnesota History Center and the cathedral here in St. Paul. And they provide context about the people, the events, and how and why that is created. We are going to do a series of those over the next several months about a variety of memorials around the state, not just the Capitol or in St. Paul, but things like Reconciliation Park in Mankato, which was referenced earlier, which had a wonderful process involving a healing component that involved many different perspectives about the tragic events of the U.S. Dakota War of 1862. Then the second part is those series of conversations that Lieutenant Governor Flanagan referenced. Those will be announced in the next month or so. We're still lining up speakers. Those will include historians. They will include community members. They will include people who can provide context about specific efforts that have been taken in the past and why some of our memorials need more discussion. And really that's the role we want to play as a historical society, is to contextualize rather than editorialize and provide a space for those perspectives to be brought together. So I'll leave it at that. If you have questions, our website, everything will be announced through there and through our social media in the coming weeks.
Thank you, Mr. Mila. And I just think that this is a really exciting opportunity for us to truly partner in this work and to be more public about that partnership and about that work. So I'm excited, and I know that Minnesotans will be too, about these panels and learning more about the state. So thank you very much, and we look forward to that. I'm cognizant of time, and so I do want to just ask if there's any concluding comments. I'm happy to entertain those now. If not, then I would ask that Representative Mandel, I just made you a member of the House, that Mr. Mandel, I'm sorry about that, that Mr. Mandel would share with us just the way that in this moment, before the public meetings begin, how the public can share with us both by snail mail, electronic mail, and then also on our website. I would ask you to share that now if you can.
Yeah, Madam Chair, that's ready to go up. And as it's going up, I will remind people, we've already gotten a number of suggestions on what could go up on the Capitol grounds, including one for Prince. And I will remind people, the state doesn't build memorials unless someone brings us a request, and it does take time and money. And one of the things that you'll find in our policies, which are on our website, is that we usually want the subject who's memorialized to be dead 10 years, so the test of time, in which case Prince would have to wait a little bit longer.
Thank you for that, Mr. Mandel. I certainly have heard quite a few calls for that also. So with that, you can see, and for folks who may be listening and unable to tune in, it is mn.gov/CAAPB/ is the website, and we've got the mailing address up here, but I also would just include the phone number. 651-757-1500 is the number as well. We want to hear from the public, and this first meeting was certainly to level set and sort of do the lay of the land. And I think what it showed us as we walked through the different jurisdictional areas and roles of the CAP Board, the Historical Society, that clearly there is need for additional conversation and clarity around process. So I'm grateful for that. And Senator Nelson, I will go back briefly to one of your comments about that when the Capitol was built, I think that there were folks who also could not have envisioned that maybe women would be elected leaders in this building and participating as well. And that is something that is not lost on me in that moment, in this moment that we find ourselves in. So this provides, I think, an incredible opportunity for us to do the real work that is required of us in this moment. And I am just grateful for each and every one of you for stepping up into this moment and into this time. And we will launch that more public process shortly. alongside the good work that the Historical Society is also going to do to inform Minnesota of our history and the context of memorials and monuments, statues across the state. So it is timely. So I am grateful for again for your service and thank you for your commitment on working on these conversations with the board.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Mr. Mandel.
Sorry to interrupt. We did make this meeting happen with the huge assistance of Minute, and I am told just now, please give us till tomorrow before you start either emailing or trying to use our website to leave comments.
Thank you for that clarification. I think our Minutes organization, which helps everyone stay connected, especially in the era of COVID-19, has been working overtime, as many of us have been working remotely on these issues. So thank you for that. So we're just remind the public, we want to hear from you, and we would be much obliged if you would wait until tomorrow to go on the website to submit those comments as well when those should be ready to go. And I will make sure that on my own social media that I will share that out as soon as it's live and ready. And I'm sure that my colleagues on the CAP board will be willing to do the same, to amplify the invitation to the public that we clearly want to hear from them on all of these issues. So we have work to do, and I'm excited to be able to do it with all of you. And in future meetings, we will build in additional time for public comment and participation as much as we can. I'll be sure to follow up with next steps as they come available, of course, to the CAP board, but also to the public generally. You know, we are in a unique time where I'd have to say that, you know, in 2015, when the decision was made to remove the artwork from the governor's reception room, which is just over my head right now, where I am in the Capitol, and then have the reinterpretation of that artwork. I participated in that process. Joe Horsecapture led that process through the Historical Society when he was there at that time, as there was an interpretation of both the painting of the treaty and Father Hennepin. I would mention during that time, during our transition, when the governor and I came into office, shortly before we came into office, we actually had those paintings covered while that was our transition office. And we did so because my daughter, who was 6 at the time, and the tribal leaders who were coming in to meet with us during the transition would not have the time to look at the full contextual meaning and interpretations along the walls. And that those are images that without interpretation, quite frankly, can be very damaging. And so those are the kinds of conversations I think that we are ready to have. I don't know that in 2015, I thought that we could move beyond simply moving these paintings to another location. But I think Minnesota is ready to have a robust conversation about what is possible in this space, in this building, to truly, you know, honor Minnesotans as a whole, but to also acknowledge the foundation upon which our state was founded and built, which is the fact that this is traditionally Dakota land, that the Ho-Chunk were also relocated from Minnesota, and that the Anishinaabe people in northern Minnesota, my people, were also here. And that much of Minnesota was built brick by brick and stone by stone by African Americans, by people of color, indigenous folks, immigrants and refugees, and that we have a real opportunity here to tell the full and rich story of Minnesota. And I hope that all of you are ready to do that together, because I certainly am, and I think Minnesota is ready for that moment. So with that, I would move to adjourn the meeting. And I don't believe that we need to go through a roll call for that. Mr. Mandel, is that correct?
I believe, unless there's any objections, I would think that's fine.
Can I get a motion to adjourn?
Senator Pappas is raising her hand, Madam Chair.
Senator Pappas, before we adjourn. Go right ahead.
I guess I'll give you a motion to adjourn. My hand was up by mistake, but I'm going to adjourn.
Thank you so much, Senator Pappas. Right on time. I appreciate it. So with that, we will, all those in favor, and I think now we can just say aye unless there's an additional objection to the meeting.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
All right. With that, members, we are adjourned, and I look forward to going on this journey with all of you. Thank you so much for your service. I appreciate it. Take care.